Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor Singapore. It's the 9th of January and our guest today is our regular Monday guest, Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming out of Singapore. Now, Vishnu, as always, great to have you on the show.
Great to be joining you, Brian. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Well, this is the first, I think, working day for many people. What we're going to do is we're going to start by taking a look at how markets have performed across the region. But before that, we'll take a look at how crypto markets are performing. So Bitcoin is at 17,237. It's up 1.378%. Ethereum is at 1,312. It's up 3.98%. Looking across to regional stock markets, it's a sea of green across the region. We start with the Straits Times Index. The SGX is up 0.53%. Bursa Malaysia is up 0.4%. Shanghai is up 0.56%. ASX All Ordinaries is up 0.66%. The Nikkei is up 0.59%. The Hang Seng is up 1.79%. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is up 2.58%. So that's quite a significant number. Tell us, Vishnu, what's the reason for the optimism in markets at this time of the year?
Well, it does look like as we've made our way through the first week of the new year, markets are gathering a little bit of optimism on two factors. Arguably, two of the biggest factors. One is, of course, China. So the China reopening story, despite the outbreak of COVID being an inevitable consequence and byproduct of that, markets are looking past that to say, in any case, China reopening and the other accompanying measures to support the property market, so on and so forth, ought to be positive. So you do get both sentiments, for China watchers as well as for global market watchers who are more strategic and looking at how much Chinese stocks have fallen last year, looking at this as an opportunity not to be missed, and that I think is giving rise to some of the optimism, including the accentuation of optimism on that on those perspectives and dimensions. The other is, of course, the U.S. So the U.S. Federal Reserve markets are now starting to look at a pivot point. They're saying, look, the Fed will pause sooner rather than later. And they're also getting a bit more optimistic about achieving a soft landing where the economy slows, but jobs are not really lost in a big way. And they're saying, okay, that ought to be the ideal outcome. So in short, markets are looking for Goldilocks at this juncture. And I think that's really what we need to bear in mind. But we also need to be aware that they haven't chased away the three bears yet either. So once in a while, we will get a bit of risk off. But the theme that has appeared to gathered some momentum and that has some legs is one of optimism about China reopening and reigniting all its engines, and the US averting a hard landing and the Fed looking to stop soon.
Now, so Vishnu, how realistic are these two scenarios though? The China scenario seems to be at least a little bit, to me, more realistic, because again, we've had the shutdown. Any sort of expansion will probably tick numbers up positively. The US story, however, is different, because what you've just alluded to, which is what investors' expectations are, is completely contrary to what the Fed is talking about.
That's really a good point, and one that we are cognizant about, and that's where we really want to discern between the point at which the Fed will pause and the point at which it'll start cutting rates, because we have to bear in mind, even if they were to just pause, they're going to pause above 5%. Listening to the recent commentary from various Fed members, the FOMC minutes, and just to point out Fed Kashkari, he's an interesting person to talk about, because he used to be an ultra dove, and then he shifted his stance. So he's not a hardcore dove in that, or a hardcore hawk in that sense. He's not like Bullard, the extreme hawkish aspect of it. And even he thinks that the Fed fund rates need to rise by another 100 basis points. So he's talking about 5.25 to 5.5%. So, clearing the 5% hurdle. If the Fed held it there for a while, whilst engaging in quantitative tightening, that's to say, draw money out of the system at 95 billion a month, with the ECB joining in March, that doesn't, usually square with an ultra bullish market. So there may be some foundations for a buyback or some kind of an upswing to come through in the markets, but the path there is not a clear one. And I think it's a winding one rather than a straight acceleration path. So that's a good point that you really brought up, Brian. That's that the markets need to be clear-eyed about how they've got slightly different perspectives from the Fed.
Now, this is the start of the year, Vishnu, in terms of really the first working week as such. What are some key data points and events that we should be looking out for that will move markets?
So I'm going to be a bit guarded here and say I'm not sure it's going to move markets, but it's hard to avoid big numbers like China's GDP and Q4 data roundup that's going to come out. These are going to look bad. Let's have no delusions about this because of the earlier was the lockdown. There's the reopening and the contagion that slammed into activity. These numbers are not going to look pretty. So this is why I'm not sure that it'll have a market impact, because I think markets expect it. They're probably not going to be shocked. They're probably going to look past it. But then again, I think for the more cautious investors, they probably need to recalibrate how much China's growth can accelerate and maintain that acceleration this year. So one key point I think that we want to think about, apart from your Fed speakers, your any of the major producers out there. One big point that we want to think about is if there is a slowdown in the global economy, how China can avert it and how they can keep their own engines running, because that must be part of the story for Asia as well.
Now, thanks again for your insights, Vishnu, as always, and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Brian. Always a pleasure to be here.
We've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investors Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and website. Thanks a lot for tuning in.